Hi, LaShawn.
Hi, how's everybody? I think I was on the wrong link, so my apologies.
No, all
I
good.
just I just saw LaShawn the other day in Chicago, so we
Oh,
keep bumping
really?
into each other.
That's so fun.
It is.
Were you in Chicago for a certain reason?
Yeah, we were there for a community asset mapping at KAM Isaiah Israel. It was a lot of fun. It was great.
It was great. It was really good.
Yeah,
You guys
yeah.
did a good job.
Thank you.
That's awesome. We'll just give people a few more minutes to show up and then we can
Okay.
get started. Hi, Mia. So, okay, Bridget, if you just want to get started, please feel free to
Sure.
do so. Thank you everyone for coming. Excited to see what this looks like.
Okay. Well, I know both Mia and LaShawn, so I don't really have to do an extensive introduction, but Bridget Fiddler, I am the Senior Director of Consulting at Partners for Sacred Places. I originally served two congregations in Connecticut and was during that time conducted a feasibility study and capital campaign with Partners for Sacred Places so that we could put in an elevator in a very tall 1956 Christian education building. And that was my introduction to Partners. And I enjoyed the work with Partners a lot because I understand how daunting it can be to to bring your congregation's profile up, to lift that profile higher in the community, because I do believe that congregations, especially mainliners, tend to be religious introverts, and we don't talk a lot about who we are and what we do. We just quietly go about our work. And the reality is that these days we can't afford to do that. Nor can we afford to be focused on getting more new members. We have to be focused on using our buildings as extensively and fully as we can, so that people understand that we are more than just a worshiping community, that we are valuable to our community, and that our building and our place in the community has civic and public value in addition to its religious and spiritual value. And so that's what this public value tool that we're going to introduce this morning will be about. It is part of something larger than this, called an economic halo study, which I'll talk a little bit about in later in our presentation. So one of the things that I'd like to share with you is that Partners is an organization that has been around for 35 years. We are based in Philadelphia, and we are primarily a preservation organization. We work to help congregations keep their buildings as in good repair as possible. I will say that that is getting harder and harder to do as our buildings age, and the cost of doing that, those repairs and restorations, gets more expensive. But we believe that sacred buildings and their communities are essential parts of our community, and that the loss of those places is sort of our founding motivation, and continues to this day to be something that we feel passionately about. We are dedicated to historic houses of worship, but we're dedicated to all houses of worship. We're non-sectarian. We serve all religions and faiths, and hope to continue to spread. That's mostly churches these days, but we are working more and more with synagogues, which is very exciting. So we provide trainings, we provide services, such as community asset mappings and strategic visioning, feasibility studies, capital campaign services. We offer transition services for congregations that are really seeking to find new ways to manage their buildings, and care for them, and remain in them without with the complete burden of managing them solely on their own. So what is the value of a sacred place? So in 1989, a group of partners, a fledgling new organization in Philadelphia, saw that buildings were, sacred buildings were being torn down, renovated or repurposed as apartments or retail outlets, and we were concerned about that. So we wanted to know what was happening and why it was happening. And we partnered with the Public Policy Department of the University of Pennsylvania and conducted a study that basically helped us realize certain important factors about sacred buildings at that time in 1989. And what you can see here is that even at that time, 81% of the people who walk through the doors of a sacred building on Monday through Friday were not there for worship. They were not there for, they were not members. They were there for a program, a service, or an event that was happening in that place. So you can see then, even then, that the majority of people who were using sacred buildings were not there for religious reasons. And that number has only continued to increase as membership in congregations has decreased. The other thing we learned from this study too is that on average, congregations contribute about 5,000 hours a year to their communities. I just want to make sure I've got the right slide there. Yeah. Okay. So 93% of congregations open their doors to the community. Congregations host 76% of their community service programs in their own buildings. The average congregation, as I said, provides 5,300 hours of volunteer support each year to its programs and its community. And the annual subsidy provided by congregations to the community, meaning money that they give to communities, services or programs, is $140,000 a year. Once again, these are 1989 numbers, and so those numbers have only continued to increase. And what happened then was, in 2016, Partners wanted to update that Sacred Places at Risk study and embarked on the economic halo effect of sacred places. This study was also conducted with the Public Policy Department of the University of Pennsylvania, And they worked with partners to do a pilot study of 100 congregations in the cities of Chicago, Dallas, Fort Worth, and Philadelphia, places where we had people, offices or consultants in place. And it was a random selection of congregations, all sizes, health and well-being, and denomination or religion. And what they studied was that congregation's local spending, their local hiring, their costs for building maintenance, which is a big one, visitor spending, right? Visitors coming for a wedding or a baptism or an event that was being held at the church or the synagogue, that what they spent when they got there, and then activities that promote community economic development. The impact that congregations make on individual lives, meaning pastors providing counseling or holding regular NAAA meetings in the building, are all powerful impacts on people's individual lives. Services that congregations offer, whether those are social services or sometimes there are medical services like having a parish nurse in place, or even a vaccine clinic or things to that nature. And then values inherent to older religious properties, recreation spaces and green spaces, especially in urban areas, are highly valuable and important economic factors in the value of that place, that sacred place. And so what this study revealed was, at that time in 2016, the average congregation had an economic impact of $1.7 million on its community annually. And this is what we found was that 40% of that was education. That means non-religious education that was taking place in their building, or a charter school that was being hosted in their building, something to that nature, a daycare. That direct spending was about 32%. That is when you go and buy supplies from your local vendor. That is when you use a local plumber or electrician to work on your building. Those are all types of direct spending. There is the magnet effect, which is about 22%. So people coming into the community, spending money because of an event or something happening at the sacred place. The invisible safety net, some of the ways that congregations really support people without a one-to-one contact. And that's invisible safety net often is where you have the pastor meeting with folks, or other ways that we're supporting the community or individuals in the community. And then other kinds of events or ways that the catalytic ways that congregations really impact their community through their services and through programs that they run that make a difference in their community. So this is an example of direct spending. So you can see that congregations' annual budget in relation to their direct spending. So it's kind of, it can be relative over a course of a year. Or it can be this bottom slide shows, or the bottom section shows over 5 years. And this includes everything that a congregation spends in its community for goods and services. Once again, the magnet effect shows different ways that congregations impact their communities by bringing people into that community or spending money in those communities. Every time you're doing an event and you use a caterer, you go to the local supermarket. Those are all ways that you're impacting your community. And the beneficiaries. So only 13% of members of the actual church or synagogue community, mosque community actually benefit from the services that a congregation offers. The majority of the beneficiaries are the community or non-member folks. And certainly if your congregation does a food pantry, I remember in my local community at the time, there was a food pantry that happened, and people came from about 13 different towns in the surrounding area. So people hear about these services and they will come to benefit from what that congregation is offering. So, and here's just different ways that individual impact happens. Working with people to help them avoid prison, marital issues, talking to people who are in abusive situations, people who are lonely, need residency, kids, so there are all these different ways that we help one another. I remember in the church I was serving, that people would come every afternoon from 12 to 1 for the local AA group. And, we just thought of it as, well, no one's using that classroom and it's a good thing to do. And we have the space and why not? Why wouldn't we do that? But we honestly didn't always think about it the same way as the folks who were attending those meetings felt about it. They realized that building was literally saving their life. And it was profound, I think, for the congregation to hear that from members of those from those meetings. So that was pretty powerful. Some congregations are business incubators or the incubators for other nonprofits. We hear often about nonprofits that have spun off of a program that began in that church. These are really powerful ways that sacred places can really make an impact. I've also heard of charter schools that have been incubated in synagogues that have then gone on to get their own buildings and to have their own new place, making room for yet another incubator school to start. So the uses for a public value finding is really important. First of all, when a congregation understands that they have an economic impact, that they have a public value in their community, it is kind of a paradigm shifting revelation. Because I think that most people in faith communities do good things out of their discipleship, out of their teachings of their faith, out of their desire to do good and to create social justice and to be good citizens, right? So there's all these reasons that they have for doing that, and they quietly go about this work, whether it's feeding people or housing people or clothing people or helping them with services that they need to live healthier, stronger, well-balanced lives. And they don't think about that in terms of dollars. But when they realize that those dollars actually can be pretty significant, it's a pretty powerful thing, because what it means to the congregation is that your good deeds, your good work, your discipleship, your following the values of your faith actually means that that the value, it just changes the way you understand the value of what your congregation is doing in the community. And for the community, what it does is it changes the way they see you as an entity, right? Because they'll often say, well, I'm not religious, or I'm not Catholic, or I'm not Jewish, or whatever the case may be. They don't really see congregations as economic players in their community. The reality is that they are. And that can vary wildly, depends on the congregation, depends on your geographical location. It depends on how much space you have and how much of that space is used for community and for services and for space sharing and other kinds of things. I worked with a small church, it was like two buildings kind of together in Hell's Kitchen in New York City. It abuts Port Authority on one side and the Midtown Tunnel on the other. And this church is nothing much to look at. It leaks like a sieve. It's totally inaccessible. And yet they use that building to the nth degree. They have all kinds of services and programs. And they even had a little farm on their roof. Their economic impact annually in their community in New York City was $16 million a year. And that's really important because Port Authority of New York is going to be renovating that terminal, and that church will be impacted by that renovation, and they need that leverage to work with the state and work with the city to make sure that there is no loss on their side financially or otherwise, or how their programs are affected. And by the way, all those people who were being shipped around the country by governors from other states knew to come to this church because they knew it was literally a block away, and they knew that there was a place of respite, there was food, there was clothing, there were bathrooms, there were services for them to access as they tried to figure out how to deal with their situation. So it's really important that congregations know about this. It's really important that you share that with your congregation, especially around stewardship time, because once again, it's like, what is your pledge doing? Well, it's doing a lot, and so that's an important part of congregations understanding where those dollars go. Because, to be honest, I don't know that people always realize that. If you're conducting a capital campaign, also super important. Same thing. Your community needs to know about this as well, because it helps you in terms of leveraging that impact for grants and other important ways to receive donations from the community. It helps you to understand that when you're giving space to a group to use because that space isn't being used by you from 12 to 1 Monday through Friday, that actually has an economic impact on your faith community's value in the community. Your local civic leaders really need to know this because they also don't understand the role that our faith communities have in our community. They know they're important because they offer services, but they don't realize the economic impact of those services. And so, once again, when you're dealing with government or local government, knowing your economic impact means you have more power. You have a place at the table. You're not just good people doing nice things. Before I move on, does anybody have any questions? Okay. So these are just some examples of public value findings. And this Old First Reformed in Park Slope in Brooklyn is a congregation that we have worked with over the years. And they really wanted to understand um, how to raise. They wanted to raise more money through space sharing to go towards the maintenance and care and preservation of their building. And they really wanted to be a part of a bigger, stronger part of the Park Slope community. So they really needed to look at some things, like if this program was housed somewhere else, how much would it cost? So they had to consider things like square footage, amenities, you know, geez, in an urban setting, if you have a parking lot, that's huge, right? Congregations, churches in particular, tend to give a lot of space away, and I understand that. It's part of our sort of mission and desire to be supportive to our community. But it's important to know what the going rate is. And it's important to know what's happening in your community in terms of what other spaces are available to be rented or to be shared. In the case of Old First Reformed, one of the things that they wanted to do was their mission statement had the phrase that they wanted to offer a radical welcome, which is a powerful statement and one often used by progressive congregations, and it's wonderful. But when it came down to them really thinking about their space sharing and what they could charge for space sharing, if they wanted to sort of see this as a source of income for their community, maintenance and preservation of their space so that they could continue to be in their space, continue to offer space to the community, they really had to look at that, giving free space to everyone wasn't going to help their cause. And so what they ended up doing was being much more careful about their space rental, and when they were renting space, and to whom, and how that impacted first of all, their congregation and the minister for music, for example, or the operations people, or other space shares. So you had to look at that whole picture. But what they also really had to do was to really understand that a radical welcome had to be something they considered very carefully and to discern. And so they still continue to offer it, but not just like willy-nilly. They really, what were the important values and part of their mission that helped them to decide who they might give a radical welcome to. And so just once again, being thoughtful and mindful about that. These are just some other ways that you can look at costs for renting spaces, and opportunities there. Real estate people are also really pretty helpful about considering costs of things in your community. Consider utilities as costs, right? The electricity and the heat, air conditioning, if it's something you have, needing to have someone there, that you have a custodian or a sexton, or a staff person staying to make sure that people are able to get out of the building, in the building and out of the building. All things to be considered. Okay, so what happened here? Let me go back. Sorry, here we are. I don't know what happened with this slide. Okay. Maybe that's the last slide. Doesn't seem to be 14 of 14. So I'm gonna stop sharing. Whoops. There it is. Sorry about that. I can't find the stop sharing thing. So I can't see what is what at the moment.
I think you're not sharing anything, or I don't see anything on my screen.
Okay. All right. Okay. So I did a lot of talking. I see there's some things in the chat. Okay, so there's just notes that are being taken. Okay. All right. So what kinds of questions do people have? Things that you're wondering about?
I'm
Yes.
sorry to apologize for coming in late, but so maybe I missed this at the beginning of the conversation. But is there a resource like a worksheet or like a template that we can use to do an accounting of this? Because I appreciate the information, but I don't know how to go about doing the public
Right.
value finding.
Right. So there is a public value tool, you need you need a passcode to access it. It will evaluate about 5 different factors. So that's something that the person who normally helps with this is leaving for another position. So Delaney and I discussed this, that what we'll do is, if you're interested in obtaining the public value tool, you share your email, and we will kind of get that coordinated, because someone really needs to sort of also just sort of walk you through it, so that you know how to access it and use it.
And is that something that will be offered to us, that consulting, for free, or do we have to pay for that?
No, you can get it for free. Yeah. If you want an economic halo, that's what you have to pay for. That measures 55 different factors. So you can see that it's significantly different, but it gets you along. The public value tool does get you on its way to sort of understanding your space and how to evaluate your space, and its value to the community. Jeff?
So I was wondering what the name of the church in Hell's Kitchen was.
Oh,
I'm here in Queens.
Metro Baptist.
Wow. Yeah, we are still involved with supporting migrants.
Uh-huh.
It's still an issue.
Yeah.
Mayor Adams is still struggling with that whole homelessness, and yeah.
It is huge. Doesn't go away right away. The other congregation that we did an economic halo study for actually is on the Upper West Side, and they do something called Miracle Mondays, and they are able to actually get someone from the Attorney General's office there, so that migrants have an opportunity to access legal help. Things like that are pretty amazing.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I'm aware of is the number of nonprofits that will use space and pay for space in a church facility at well below market rates.
Right.
That's subsidized assistance, even though we don't think of it that way. That's money we're giving away.
It is.
To the community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really, you're absolutely, and this is kind of an uncomfortable place for I'll speak just to churches, since we're churches here, it's an uncomfortable place for congregations, because they don't feel like they should be. We're givers, right? We're givers, so we don't like to ask for anything. And I think we feel like we should give our space away. And just like the example of Old First Reform, there are points and places and times when you should, right? But you have to make accommodation for that. You have to really think about that. And it was a process for them to consider all of that. And you're in Queens, right? I mean, we talked about like the value of property in New York City, right? It's where that plot of land that you sit on has economic value. The green space that's in front of it has economic value. So for Metro Baptist and Hell's Kitchen, well, their green space was literally on their roof where they had this little farm, but it was also the front stoop where people would kind of hang out, right? So, it's a little bit different for every congregation depending on where you are. If you have a parking lot, that's huge, right? What kind of spaces do you have for the community to access? It's an important thing to look at, the square footage, literally. Spaces where people can gather, big spaces, small spaces. Do you have a theater? Do you have a stage? These are all kinds of different factors. And just in terms of the real estate. So it is important to talk about those things, because if congregations are really uncomfortable asking for money, that's a conversation to be had before you embark.
Is there a way to, or let me ask it this way. In what ways, if any, does the type of demographic of who's coming into the building impact this assessment? So for example, I'm an urban city, most of us are downtown, very diverse neighborhood in every way you could think of. Are the people coming in the building reflect that diversity? Does that change how we do the accounting? Does it help with the accounting? Does it add additional economic value? What are
No,
your thoughts on that?
It really doesn't. And and the public value tool, because it just measures 5 different factors, isn't going to make as much of an impact, but it's really the amount, the way the space is used, not the people using it. So the only factor would be, if you're doing religious education, that's not considered part of the public value. If you're doing a Head Start program, or a daycare, or some kind of like a vaccine clinic, or something that benefits the wider community, is really what impacts it. That's not it. Does that answer your question? No.
No, I'll give an explicit example. So for example, we have 2 Nepalese not-for-profit organizations in our building. So they are particularly aimed at serving the needs of a very dense Nepalese senior citizen population in our neighborhood. So when we do a blood drive and partnering with that organization, we're bringing in, a whole different clientele, that may not otherwise ever come into our Presbyterian church, right? So we're doing a blood drive, and I know that is of value, but now we're also reflecting a different type of demographic. So is that not? I
see.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think that's as much of a factor in all of this.
And I'm going to push back on that, because I think it could be an evaluated factor, because if there are some spaces that are not accessible to certain populations, then we're adding value to holding space for those particular communities that would otherwise not find space or have space.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I don't know if that's the way the tool. So once again, I'm not talking about the public value tool at this point. I'm talking about the economic halo, which is much more involved. I don't think that's at this point in time a factor. So I think that's and the tool is being revamped because it also started in 2016 and things have changed pretty radically since then, especially with the pandemic. So the tool is being revamped for that purpose as well. I think what it is that you might see that as part of the invisible safety net, or that individual impact might be where you can promote that as part of your congregation's work. But I don't know that it impacts the value. So I'd make that distinction. Jeff?
So one of the things I'm wondering is, I mean, when you get to the halo effect, it appears to me that it would be more related to congregations or faith communities that are more social justice oriented. When you get to more conservative religious groups, they're more looking to maintain a certain doctrine and less concerned maybe about those issues that churches like First Reform of Brooklyn would.
Right.
Is that accounted for in this study in any way, or is that reflected in the public value tool?
I don't think it's reflected in the public value tool. In the economic halo, it's not so much where you are on the well, right. So the interpretation of social justice is an interesting thing, right? So it's really has open you are, right, to, because there's a lot of, let's say, I mean, this is where all our assumptions like fall into this. You know, that very conservative churches, for example, their idea of social justice might be different than a progressive, but they're still offering oil changes for single moms, right? So you get their values. You know, you have to kind of look sort of more broadly. But so that's a factor. Remind me of the first part of your question.
I was just wondering if that was, if the value changed significantly or not, as far as you know, the focus of the faith
Oh,
community.
right. So then there are more, what I might sort of say, insular congregations who are going to have a harder time with maybe they can do the public value tool. They can measure their real estate, they can measure their green space, they can measure you know, some of the services that they offer. But you know, if your congregation is offering you know, I don't mean to sound derogatory about this, but if you're crocheting baby clothes and bringing them to the neonatal unit, that's kind of one thing, right? If you're bringing people into your building and you're providing services and support for them, that's another. Some of those insular congregations, and I will sort of say some Catholic congregations, for example, they don't have a lot of, they may not have a lot of social services in the same way that other congregations might, but they might have a school that serves all kinds of children in their community. And that's where their economic impact comes in. So it's really, you know, it varies from church to church in that regard. Yeah, it's an interesting question.
Thank you. I will also share that one of the things churches don't go after public funding because
Mhm.
as you get into, and this gets again to the liberal and conservative, how much proselytizing are you doing? And
Mhm.
that's going to prevent a lot of public funds from coming your way.
Right.
I'm in Queens and we actually got the borough president to give us money for our operating fund because we
Great.
asked for it. But,
Yep.
you know, churches don't think like that. And a lot of the grant writers that are out there that will give money for nonprofits won't give them to churches unless you find some compelling mission that they say, well, yeah,
Right.
you're a
They'll
church.
support a program, like a feeding program, for example. That's why a lot of congregations start separate non-religious 501c3s, right? So that they can access those community dollars more easily, or foundations, right? One of the things that Partners is really trying to do is to help foundations that don't normally support religious organizations to support their non-religious activities. They may be born of their values or their discipleship, but they're not geared towards proselytizing or getting new members. They're geared towards serving people and their needs. And so that's part of what our function is these days, because it's so important for congregations to be able to access public dollars, because our congregations can't support what the needs that we have. You know, they can do a part of the way, they'll do what they can, but more and more of what I see is that congregations are needing to raise. When I started working at Partners 5 years ago, congregations, maybe they need to raise like $1 million, $2 million. Now that's blossomed into, you know, 5 million, $10 million. It's like a whole different ball game. And partly that's the cost of services has increased, and the deferred maintenance that has just, you know, continued to get, you know, to get worse, right? So because it's so expensive and you're trying to band-aid all the time. So it is a real challenge these days to really find that place. And so to be able to raise your profile, and to be able to raise that profile in such a way that isn't about what you do on Sunday so much as what you're doing the rest of the week, is super, super important. And you need to invite your legislators, your aldermen, your city council members into your communities, to have them come see what happens during you know, one of those events that happens on a weekday, right? Jeff, I remember your church hosted a chess club for kids in the community, right? I mean, that's a great after school program, right? So there are things like that I think are just really important to share. And I just know from, you know, on the Upper West Side that it's you know, city council members like Gail Brewer are really super supportive of some of the congregations in her district, because she gets invited to things, she knows about them, and I think that's part of sort of the public value begins with your mindset, and then that all sort of follows along, right? So that's why I was going to say it's that idea of asking for more, which is hard to do for congregations. Any other questions about, I mean, it, you know, in and around this? If you have any other questions, I'll try to answer them.
You're going to get a copy of the slides.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah, you sent it. You did send
it's
it.
it's yeah, and it's being recorded, right? So you'll be able to see that.
Well, we got a copy of this report, Sacred Places at Risk, but I don't know about the slides themselves. Which were pretty interesting.
Yeah. There is also something called the economic. It's a report about the economic halo study, which once again broader, but still sort of the same concepts and ideas about the public value of your sacred place. So, and what happens also, one of the things we talk about is what happens when several congregations begin to fail in one community, and what happens to bye Mia what happens when you when to a community and the services that you offer, so it is the way you begin to think about yourselves and what you offer that is the most important first step in all of this, and then to share it. So the public value tool is very, very helpful. And I would just say also something that you can do that doesn't cost anything, and something we always recommend, is invite people into your building, and have invite them, take them for a tour. It's so hard to cross the threshold of a sacred place. And then maybe have a community conversation. Invite people from the community in. Take them for a tour. Ask them about what they see. What do they see? What do they see as assets? It can be very, very affirming to be able to. We just did so this is part of a community asset mapping. Is going for this tour of the building. LaShawn was part of that, and just describing the different spaces and what they're used for. And then to have bring everybody back together to sort of share what they saw, those assets that they saw, but then also to hear back. We are often so focused on what we see that's not right, that still needs to be fixed, that we don't have enough of. That when the community says, "Oh wow, this is amazing! I didn't even know this existed." It's very affirming. Bye, Jeff. It was good to see you.
Yeah, that's true. When you talk about mindset, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, perfect. When you talk about mindset, that is like everything. So you're able to look at the building, look at the space as value. And that's one step of what you're saying. We look at a closet or somewhere where the choir meets as just where the choir meets. But when someone else comes into the space, you look at it, oh, well, this could be, it could be an office space. It could be something different. So looking at space in a different way. And it was refreshing for you to say about the local plumbers, like how we have value as a sacred space of jobs, creating employment for. That is very true. Our food pantry has employed a lot of students from the university. So that's a local income, assets. So yeah, it's very refreshing to see how we look at things differently, and what we don't think is assets are really, really assets.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, there's a really good book by a guy named Luther Snow on asset mapping. That's a good resource to sort of look at that kind of thing, and to really begin to see from instead of from abundance as opposed to scarcity. And this is a challenging time, so it's natural to think in scarcity terms, but to really begin to shift the dial just enough to allow your congregation to sort of dream a bit, and to see things in a positive light. What do we offer? Really helps to sort of change the way we look at things. The synagogue that we were in last week, it's a time when a lot of Jewish communities feel under siege, and very unpopular at the moment. And the people who came some were Jewish, but a lot of them weren't, or they weren't religious at all. And to hear to hear them reflect back on what they saw in that space, their justice garden and their, you know, their meeting room spaces, their beautiful sanctuary, even though it had no, you know, it's still under renovation. All those things were just really affirming. And I think for people who, I'll just say like LaJean, who's like really like studying this stuff, you know, it was very affirming because you're working so hard to make this work, right? To keep things in a time of real evolution and almost a revolution. I think a reformation. We don't even exactly know what's happening, but we know it's changed drastically. So, and the other thing that I would say, and this is something I know LaShawn Church has done in Chicago, is to clean the space out. You know, I mean, it might cost you a dumpster, but clean the space out. You know, I've always been marveled that people would come in and leave stuff on a bench in the front, you know, lobby, and how long would it actually sit there before someone said, what is this and why is it here? So, you know, and there's a lot of stuff we don't know what to do with. We don't want to step on anybody's toes. We don't know how it got there. We don't know how long it's been there, but it's, you know, just to clean out the space is a huge way to sort of understand what kind of space you have and to be able to envision it differently. The other thing is if you have people sharing your space, but they're not paying very much. We had an AA group that met Monday through Friday. They said, can we paint the room? We'll provide the paint, and we'll provide the people power, and we'll paint the room. We're like, great, let's just see what colors you want to use. And if those colors work with us, sure, let's do it. So, you know, there are ways to just clean up spaces too that don't cost a lot of money, that can make them look, you know, more receptive to potential space sharers or community partners, long-term space renters. You know, any other thoughts or ideas? I'll try to. Delaney and I did talk about when we could provide the public value tool for those who are interested, and I will look into that. We just need someone new on staff to basically present it and make sure that if you have it, you know, walk you through it a little bit. So, but I think it's definitely something that would be is the next step, right? Work on the mindset, work a little bit on your space, look at your space with new eyes. If you can, bring a friend in who's never been inside, or someone you know who's never been inside, get their perspective, and then use the public value tool. I think that would be really helpful. Okay, Delaney, I don't know if you wanna,
Yeah,
looks like people have to go, so.
yes, absolutely. I would just wanted to have a small evaluation, just like a poll. It should take you a few moments if you want to fill it out. I just launched it. Let me know if you see it. But thank you so much, Bridget. This was very
You're
interesting.
welcome.
I love learning about all this, because I definitely came on staff and didn't know about the world of congregations and all the different things happening. So this is really awesome to just learn about asset mapping and just how to think of churches as community spaces. And
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
really,
All right.
really awesome.
Okay, stay well. Great to see you, LaShawn. Bye,
Thank
Michelle.
you.
Bye, Delaney.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Delaney, I was trying to do the
Oh, you were?
evaluation and it disappeared.
Okay, let me try to relaunch it. Yeah, here, I'm gonna relaunch it.
Okay.
Thank you, Michelle.